Hello and welcome to Neo Psychology of me, your teacher, Mr. Neo, the channel where I teach online psychology lessons for my wonderful students. We're carrying on with the attachment unit and we're looking at the penultimate lesson, lesson 11, Romanian Orphan Studies, the effects of institutionalization. Let's get started. An orphan is a child whose parents have either died or have abandoned them permanently. How might your life be different if you grew up in an institution? Two examples of an institution would be an orphanage or even sometimes a hospital. Using what you understand about attachment, how might growing up in an institution put you at a disadvantage in comparison to growing up with a family? Have a little think about that. We've got 4 learning objectives today. 1. Show comprehension and apply knowledge of Rutter's English and Romanian Adoptee study. Learning objective 2. Identify and analyze the Bucharest Early Intervention Project. 3. Review and investigate effects of institutionalization. And then, of course, discuss and evaluate the Romanian Orphan Studies. Let's start with number 1. Rutter's 2011 English and Romanian Adoptee Study. Bowlby's theory of maternal deprivation predicted long-term negative effects result from early maternal deprivation. This can be studied in the context of institutional care. Much of our modern understanding of this has come from studies carried out in the last 25 years in Romania, because historical events left a large number of children there in poor quality institutions. Research on maternal deprivation has turned to orphan studies as a means of studying the effects of deprivation, a tragic opportunity to look at the effects of institutional care and the consequent institutionalization arose in Romania in the 1990s. What type of experiment is this? There are 4 types of experiments: lab, field, natural, and quasi. Right? What type of experiment is this? Research methods question, just off the top of my head. Right. This is a natural experiment, okay? Because we are not manipulating the independent variable. We haven't gone out and deprived a load of Romanian children of their mothers or parents and made a load of Romanian orphans. No, it was a naturally existing IV, okay? Former President Nicolae Ceausescu required Romanian women to have 5 children. Abortion and contraception was banned. Many Romanian parents could not afford to keep their children, and the children ended up in huge orphanages in very poor conditions. After the 1989 revolution, many of the children were adopted, some by British parents. Now, if you don't know about communism or history, you know, there was this idea of communism, this way of running the country, not like capitalism, like in the societies we live in. Romania was living in this communist regime, and they believed, well, bigger population, more workers, bigger army, more power, and this is why they wanted bigger population, which is why they made abortion and contraception illegal. This is a video about growing up in a Romanian orphanage. Watch it and think about the following questions. How might growing up in an orphanage or institution affect these individuals? How would poor early experiences in institutions affect their physical, cognitive and emotional development as they grow up? Okay, have a think about this as we watch the video, right? Not spoiler alert, just a little warning. It is very sad, okay?
So in 1989, communism fell, and the world went to Romania to cover the fall of Ceausescu. There were some medias that actually found institutions that were never meant to be discovered by the public or the outside world. It left the world in shock that such conditions even existed.
Those of us who visited these institutions built by the communist regime are unlikely ever to forget them. Hundreds of children not so much cared for as contained.
Well, at the age of 6 months old, I became ill, and my parents took me to a hospital to be treated for my illness. But instead of finding healing at a hospital, I actually ended up being infected with polio. My parents took me to a different hospital in Sighetu Marmația. They never came back. So the state put me in an institution for handicapped children, an orphanage known as Home Hospital for the Irrecoverable Children.
What's in this room, no one could prepare for. Filthy, dark and stinking. There's excrement everywhere. These boys are the most difficult cases. They deserve the best of care. Instead, they get the worst.
From the moment that we could remember for ourselves, that's all we knew. We didn't have compassion. We didn't have feelings or emotions. We just existed to just vegetate. We were just wild animals that needed to be caged up, is what we were considered pretty much. I grew up there up until I was 11 years old.
Romania has precious little that the world wants except its children. These are the children soon to start a new life far from their real parents. Some orphanages have been emptied already.
I was adopted by a family in Southern California in San Diego, Marlis and Daniel Rutter. It was difficult pretty quickly, actually. I could not adapt into a family environment. My mind was just so used to living in the institution, I was desperate to go back to Romania. I got angry. I became super bitter. I even wrote letters asking the workers if they would let me stay with them till I was 18 years old. Each and every single one of them said no. I went back to Romania in 2001. I went to meet my birth family to search for answers. We also went back to the institution where I grew up. I tried to understand my mom. I tried to get to know her, but unfortunately, not every parent wants to be a parent. If I had never come to America, I would either be on the streets or absolutely dead. There's so many kids who are just kicked out of this, kicked out of the system. Every city I went into Romania, or every county, when you see a grown adult sitting or standing, rocking back and forth, or doing something that only an institutionalized person would do, you can instantly recognize that person grew up in an orphanage. I do miss the institution sometimes, and people don't understand that because they've never experienced it. It's what we're used to. That's where we grew up. It's our home.
Okay, let's have a look at Rutter's English and Romanian adoptee study. Here's the procedure. Rutter and colleagues have followed a group of 165 Romanian orphans adopted in Britain to test to what extent good care could make up for poor early experiences in institutions. Physical, cognitive, and emotional development has been assessed at the ages of 4, 6, 11, and 15 years. A group of 52 British children adopted around the same time has served as a control group. When they first arrived in the UK, half the adoptees showed signs of a delayed intellectual development, as Bowlby's maternal deprivation theory predicted, and the majority were severely undernourished. At the age of 11, the adopted children showed differential rates of recovery that were related to the age of their adoption. Depending on when they were adopted, depended on how severe their intellectual development disability was. the mean IQ for those children adopted before the age of 6 months was 102. Bear in mind the average IQ is 100. So these kids that were adopted before the age of 6 months were perfectly normal, ever so slightly above the average, but basically average. Compared with an IQ of 86 for those adopted between 6 months and 2 years, and an IQ of 77 for those adopted after 2 years old. These differences remained at the age of 16, and that's research done by Beckett et al. In 2010. In terms of attachment, there appeared to be a difference in outcome related to whether adoption took place before or after 6 months. Those children adopted after they were 6 months showed signs of a particular attachment style, which we haven't seen before, called a disinhibited attachment. So far from Ainsworth's research, we only had a look at 3 attachment styles, right? We had secure, insecure avoidant, and insecure resistant. These children had an attachment type that we had never seen before, a disinhibited attachment. Symptoms of a disinhibited attachment included attention seeking, clinginess, and social behaviour directed indiscriminately towards all adults, both familiar and unfamiliar. In contrast, those children adopted before the age of 6 months rarely displayed a disinhibited attachment. Now, this 6-month mark is really significant. It shows that if you were adopted after 6 months, you are more likely to have this disinhibited attachment and more likely to have a lower IQ. Those adopted before that had a perfectly normal IQ and were unlikely to display a disinhibited attachment. Why is 6 months significant? If we think back to lesson 2, shapeless stages of attachment, it's around 6-7 months when attachments start to form, when we go into that specific attachment stage. Quick question. 2 minutes, 2 marks. What is meant by institutionalisation? Give that a go. 2 minutes, 2 marks. Write your answer down. What is meant by institutionalisation? Explain is an AO1. Okay, you're just describing what is institutionalisation. Give that a go now. Institutionalization is a term used to describe the effects of living in an institution such as a hospital or an orphanage where children live for long continuous periods. In such places there is very little emotional care provided, and this may have long-term effects on the child's development. They are maternally deprived. And that's Rutter's English and Romanian Adoptee study. Identify one thing you've learned about Rutter. Why do you think learning about this is important? How does this apply in real life? Who is this important to? And that's learning objective 1. Show comprehension and apply knowledge of Rutter's English and Romanian Adoptee study. Done. We're moving on to learning objective 2. Identify and analyse the Bucharest Early Intervention Project. Zena et al. Assessed attachment in 95 children aged 12 to 31 months who had spent most of their lives in institutional care, 90% on average. They were compared to a control group of 50 children who had never lived in an institution. Their attachment type was assessed using the strange situation. In addition, carers were asked about unusual social behaviours, including clinginess, attention-seeking behaviour directed inappropriately to all adults, i.e. a disinhibited attachment. They found that 74% of the control group came out as securely attached in the strange situation. Very similar numbers to what was found in Ainsworth's strange situation. However, only 19% of the institutional group were securely attached. 65% being classified as a disorganized attachment, the description of disinhibited attachment applied to 44% of the institutionalized children, as opposed to less than 20% of the controls. And that's the Bucharest Early Intervention Project. Identify one thing you learned from that. Why do you think it's important? How does it apply in real life? Who is this information useful to? Now, the reason why those with the disinhibited attachment, they were very clingy, attention-seeking, and they didn't differentiate between people that they had met for the first time or people that they had known for many years, is because people with a disinhibited attachment were so desperate from attention, they were willing just to get it from absolutely anyone, whether it's someone they'd known from their whole life or whether it's someone they met that day. Let's have a look at the effects of institutionalization. We have in mind some of the effects that we think might happen because we know some of the effects of maternal deprivation, as was suggested by Bowlby, but let's have a look at this research done with the Romanians. One of the effects of institutionalization is this disinhibited attachment. Disinhibited attachment is a typical effect of spending time in an institution. They are equally friendly and affectionate towards people they know well or who are strangers that they have just met. This is highly unusual behavior. Remember that most children in their second year show signs of stranger anxiety. These kids showed no stranger anxiety. Rutter had explained disinhibited attachment as an adaptation to living with multiple caregivers during the sensitive period for attachment formation. In poor quality institutions like those in Romania, a child might have 50 carers, none of whom they see enough to form a secure attachment. If you remember from the video, there were cots of children literally everywhere, and within those cots they would have like 2-3 kids, okay? You would have an adult to look after a whole of those cots in the room with all those children in the room, maybe another room as well, okay? There's no way that the person looking after them were able to form a special, secure, loving, nurturing attachment as a parent would. It's not possible. Right. Application question. Let's apply our knowledge to this scenario with Nadia. Nadia was adopted when she was 2 years old. Prior to this, she had lived in a home for orphans. Now at the age of 11, she is doing well at school, but her parents and teachers have noticed that she has a tendency to be attention-seeking, including with strangers. Her adoptive parents wonder if this could be related to her early experiences before being adopted. Question. Referring to the effects of institutionalization, explain why Nadia may be showing this unusual social behavior. Pause the video, give yourself 5 minutes to answer the question, write it down, don't be lazy, give it a go now please. Why is Nadia showing this unusual social behavior? Nadia is showing signs of a disinhibited attachment type. This is quite common in children adopted following early institutional care, especially where children are adopted after the first 6 months. Disinhibited attachment is likely to be an adaptation of having multiple carers during the time a child is forming their primary attachment. Mental retardation, now known as intellectual disability disorder. In Rutter's study, most children showed signs of intellectual disability disorder when they arrived in Britain. However, most of those adopted before they were 6 months old caught up with the control group by age 4. So they were able to catch up. They were able to not be left behind and not have that issue of the intellectual disability. It appears that, like emotional development, damage to intellectual development as a result of institutionalization can be recovered provided adoption takes place before the age of 6 months, the age at which attachment formed, Schaeffer's stages of attachment. Right. Last application question. Irina. Right? Irina was adopted by British parents when she was 2 months old. She had lived for most of her life prior to this in a poor quality Romanian orphanage. At the age of 16, she did less well in her GCSEs than most of her friends. A family friend says to Irina's adoptive mother, "What can you expect with her background?" Referring to what you know about the intellectual development of Romanian orphans adopted in Britain, what would you say to the family friend? Give that a go. Right. Based on what we know about the outcomes for adopted Romanian orphans, I would say to the family friend that her explanation is probably incorrect. Whilst it is true that some late adopted Romanian orphans still lag in intellectual development and underachieve at school, this is not normally the case for orphans adopted as young as Irina was at 2 months old. So mind your business. That was a bit sassy. Right, they are the effects of institutionalization. Identify one thing you've learned. Why do you think it's important to learn about this? How does this apply in real life? Well, there's literally real life examples of this. Who is this information useful to? Potentially orphanages, right? This is really important information. Right, the last thing we're going to do now is have a look at the evaluation. What are some of the strengths and limitations of Romanian orphan studies? One strength is that there's real life application. Studying the Romanian orphans has enhanced our understanding of the effects of institutionalization. Such results have led to improvements in the way children are cared for in institutions. That's Langton's research in 2006. For example, orphanages and children's homes now avoid having large numbers of caregivers for each child and instead ensure that a much smaller number of people, perhaps only 1 or 2 people, play a central role for the child. This person is called a key worker. Having a key worker means that children have the chance to develop normal attachments and helps avoid a disinhibited attachment. This shows that such research has been immensely valuable in practical terms. This has helped our understanding in orphanages. We understand now that you can't just have 50 people working with you acting as your substitute caregiver, right? Maybe 1 or 2 maximum key workers, right? So you can develop that rapport, right? So you can build a better foundation and ideally not have these effects of maternal deprivation. One weakness of this research is that the Romanian orphans were not typical. Although much useful data about institutionalization has come out of the Romanian orphan study, it is possible that conditions were so bad that results cannot be applied to understanding the impact of better quality institutional care or indeed any situation where children experience deprivation. For example, Romanian orphanages had particularly poor standards of care, especially when it came to forming any relationship with the children, and extremely low levels of intellectual stimulation. This is a limitation of the Romanian orphan study because the unusual situational variables means the studies may, after all, lack generalizability. Are there any similarities between these Romanian orphans growing up in an institution and those people in Britain growing up in an orphanage? No, there's absolutely no comparison, okay? The care in Romania was absolutely awful, right? Absolutely awful. They weren't just deprived of a parent, they were deprived of everything. They were deprived of all sorts of attention, all sorts of support, all sorts of help with homework, potentially schooling, right? Sleeping, right? Some of the kids were tied down to their cots. They were fed rubbish food. They were malnourished, okay? They were deprived of everything, not just parents, everything, okay? So you can't say that the reason why the Romanian orphans are why they are is because they were deprived of parents, because there are so many factors that they were deprived of that you can't put it down to one thing. The results aren't like anything else we'd seen, so they're not really generalizable. Lastly, the long-term effects are not yet clear. The studies described have now followed up fostered and adoptive orphans into their mid-teens and found some lasting effects of early experience, in particular for those adopted late. However, it is too soon to say with certainty whether children suffered short or long-term effects. It may be that the children who spent long in institutions and currently lag behind in intellectual development or display attachment difficulties may still catch up as adults. Equally, early adopted or fostered children who appear to have no issues may now experience emotional problems as adults. These Romanian orphans, they were found in 1989, right? I was born in 1990, so these Romanian orphans will be not much older than me, and they could be younger than me, right? I'm still relatively young, right? Right? So the point is, we still don't know. Maybe their intelligence caught up later on. Maybe in their 30s, maybe in their 40s or 50s, they'll be fine. It's unlikely, but we don't know is the point. Okay? The long-term effects are still unclear. There's still time. Okay, this is a weakness. This is a limitation. Summarize each evaluative point into exactly 10 words for us, please. Give that a go now. Spend 5 minutes on that. And that's the evaluation. Let's move on to the plenary. Research methods, correlation. In Rutter's research on Romanian orphans, it was found that at age 4 years, there was a negative correlation between age at adoption and intellectual development, IQ score, at the age of 4. Answer these 4 questions, please. 1. Briefly explain the difference between a correlation and an experiment. What's the difference? 2. What are the implications for the conclusion we can draw from this study? 3. Explain why you might expect to obtain a negative correlation in this study. And then 4. Sketch a scatter graph or a scattergram showing that what the results would look like. Give those 4 a go. 5 minutes, give it a go now. Let's go through the answers. Briefly explain the difference between a correlation and an experiment. An experiment tests cause and effect by looking at the impact of varying the level of an independent variable on a dependent variable. A correlation just looks at the mathematical relationship between 2 dependent variables. There isn't an independent variable. There isn't a variable that you're manipulating. You're merely looking if there's a relationship between 2 covariables. So you can't come to a cause and effect because you can't say X is causing Y. Because it could be Y is causing X, or Z is causing X and Y. Okay? What are the implications for the conclusions we can draw from this study? It means that we cannot draw any conclusion about a causal relationship because the variables of age of adoption and intellectual development. We can't come to a cause and effect. Is it the fact that they've been adopted later on that caused them to have a lower IQ? Or is it possibly that because they have a lower IQ, they got adopted later on? Or maybe there's a third variable affecting both of those. We're not sure is the point. Explain why you might expect to obtain a negative correlation in the study. According to Bowlby maternal deprivation hypothesis and the ERA research, you would expect intellectual development to be poor the later the children were adopted. And then finally, sketch a graph. It should look like this. There's a negative correlation between the age at adoption in months and the IQ. And that was today's lesson. That was lesson 11, Romanian Orphan Studies. Next lesson is our last lesson on attachment. It's the influence of early attachment on later relationships. Well done, my neuropsychologists. Great job today. You're so hard working. I'm proud of you all. I've been Mr. Neo. God bless and peace.
I'm feeling like Will. I feel like a prince. I'm feeling myself. I'm loaded with bills. Cause I wasn't blessed with no Uncle Phil. Don't know how it feels. I wanted to flex. They told me to chill. I'm making a flip. My life is a flick. Now load up the film.